Hello there. I was just getting mesmerized by the image of a ride that I went on a couple of days ago. It's 5:02 p.m. Friday the 29th of May 2026. And don't you know it, I just got done with another ride. And it was a good one. I went out there not feeling like I had much material, and I came back materialized. And my dad wants me to help him cut something here in a minute. However, he told me he wasn't going to let me cut it. Shout out to my dad. And so I don't really know what part of my being there he needs, because apparently I'm not going to be the one to do any of the work. But that's sometimes what you get with Pereiro projects. You get 6 hands for the price of 1, or something like that. What did they say? 2 Pereiros, 3 opinions. You know what I'm saying? We're getting into that kind of realm of territory. But in any case, there's this, the route that I did a couple of days ago. It looks like, there's this thing called Strava art. If you're not familiar, and Strava art is pretty much what it sounds like. Although if you're not familiar with Strava, you probably are not quite there yet. But basically, Strava, you can draw lines on a map, and the red line is your line. It's what you did over that space, And so some people will go out and they will create images with the Strava red line, and that is known as Strava art. And some pretty impressive things have been made using streets and roads and trails to, make these basically virtual, what would you call that? Virtual crop circles. Now, Notebook LM, I don't want you to get too freaked out with all the stuff I'm about to say, because I always look forward to the way that Notebook LM titles my transcripts, and I do purposefully try to think of interesting ways of phrasing my ideas to see if I can coerce it into a certain direction, I suppose you could say. But I do not think that digital crop circles is a good title for this, but maybe you'll disagree. Another interesting thing, shout out to lots of people, I have endeavored to become more aware of the amount that I say the word like and that I say the word I did take a transcript recently, and in a 20-minute period, I said 33 times, and then I believe it was like 66 times. So we got like a 2-to-1 ratio, almost, well, exactly, And, there you go. I think that sometimes is appropriate, but as someone wise said to me, oh my God, now I'm getting too aware, it's about peppering them in, Man, maybe this one should just be called But yeah, I think Dr. Alok Kanogia, he said that the most important part of any kind of significant change within yourself is first awareness, right? And I agree with that. I think that if I were to try to sit here and talk to myself for 20 or 30 minutes and not say or, that I would be dead in the water, because I would be focused. It's like that thing where they say, don't think about a pink elephant. It's like the first thing you think of. I've never actually thought that was very effective. I think about, I don't see a pink elephant when I hear that sentence. I hear someone trying to trick me, because for so long people have always said that this effect is like telling someone not to visualize a pink elephant. And now I just strictly don't do it. I will never ever visualize a pink elephant as long as I live. Anytime someone tells me to visualize something, I automatically excise pink elephant as a possibility, because I have been aware of this specific psychological trap for so many years. So anyway, yes, I am trying to be aware of my speech, right action, etc., so on and so forth ad infinitum. But let's have a sip. I almost said but I actually did stop that one pretty naturally, so you're welcome. I don't want to talk about this too much, but suffice it to say, I had an interview recently for a job, and that came as a very big surprise following the AI panel meetup that I did on, that was Tuesday. I woke up on Wednesday with an offer for an interview. And so I set that up for the following day, Thursday. And today, like I said, is Friday. So if I'm doing the math right here, that means that yesterday I had an interview. And I don't want to talk too much about what it is, what it's for, or anything like that. No specifics. I feel like thinking about it too much, first of all, is not a very happy place to exist. Like, thinking about whether or not you'll get a job is not like a fun space to inhabit as a human being, you know? And so I don't want to give it additional power over myself. And secondly, I am familiar with this specific, I believe it's a Jewish practice that for some unknown to me amount of time, as soon as you have your child, after you've had a child, you don't actually name them something good. You call them like, you know, trash can or waste paper basket or dustpan, you know, because you don't want to incite the fates into jealousy over your reverie. You know, jealousy over your reverie is pretty good up Notebook LM, but I still got another one coming, and I think this one's much better. This episode will also feature me attempting to speak like an Australian, which is to say, saying something with an Australian accent, which I found I had to practice a lot on my bike, and I had to say it pretty loudly for me to like get the enunciation correct. So for the sake of embarrassing myself and being more open to that, I will attempt my Australian impression later, but that's really where the meat of the titles that I think Notebook LM, I'm not trying to twist your arm or anything, but I really think I got a good one for you. Anyway, yeah, so I don't want to talk about it too much, and that's about as much as I want to talk about something I don't want to talk about. That was also a line that I thought about while I was on my bike. So suffice it to say, hopefully next week I'll have some kind of an idea about what my employment status for the future will be. I mean, I will know. I will know one way or the other. But, you know, obviously, I have a little bit of a desire for it to go a certain kind of way. So, yes, I don't have much to say about that. And yesterday, when I finally came home from Atlanta, which was, again, a little bit more extended of a stay than I expected, but that was all good and all cool, I basically stepped out of my car and then was immediately roped into about maybe 2 hours of yard work, maybe like an hour and a half if we're honest. Shout out to my parents. And that was fine. Like I had gone for a bike ride that morning so that I could get some of my anxious willies out, you know, like just biking in my aunt's neighborhood and then creating that shape that I talked about with the digital crop circle, which really is a cool shape. I will make that the album art. So if you're confused, hopefully you're not confused anymore. But I really like the shape, not to mention the fact that it looks like a circuit, which I think is kind of cool. I guess I should go ahead and just get into this, because the fact that I'm bringing up circuits and fractals and stuff, which I promise this is not purely just stoner logic or anything like that. I really do think that there is an irreducible code to everything. I saw roadkill on my ride, as I often do, of various types. If there is an animal in this country, I have likely seen it dead on the road. I'm trying to think if there are any exceptions to that. Well, I can say confidently on the East Coast, every animal that you would see commonly alive, I have seen in an unalived form. Shout out to Vicky. Unalived. We had a conversation about that word, that very word, the very same, during our excellent lunch the other day. So shout out to both Mike and Vicky, for that matter. But yes, I do think that everything has a reducible code. I remember when I was a young person in high school, and I guess probably college as well, but maybe not so much. But I was very to say active is not correct. I was very invested in the early atheist movement that was going on in the early 2010s, you know, with people like Charles Darwin, Richard Dawkins, people like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, my absolute favorite, who passed away on my birthday, and others. You know, it was interesting. I felt like it was kind of like a cultural study abroad. I kind of got to know a lot about the history of science. and a little bit about the history of mankind, broadly speaking, by listening to these debates that were so popular in the early days of YouTube during this atheist movement. I still think Christopher Hitchens is one of the best orators of my generation, or of his generation, I guess would make more sense to say. He's so captivating to listen to, and he's got like this little sassy feminine quality to him where he's kind of like talking back, like, I am a straight white male, but he is a sexy rhetorician, my dude. And don't take a sexy rhetorician as the title, Notebook LM. Especially if I'm talking about Christopher Hitchens. But yeah, there was this concept of irreducible complexity. I think it was proposed by J.D.S. Hallstein. I don't know, Notebook LM, you can check me on that. But yeah, systems of irreducible complexity. It sounds like a very fancy way of basically just saying we don't have the good enough tools or ideas yet to break something down beyond where it is. And here comes my dad. Shout out to my dad. So time to pause so I can do something reducibly simple. False. Oh, he's back. Okay, that was a false alarm that turned into a real alarm. So it was a false positive, positive, false alarm. Irreducible complexity is an argument popularized by intelligent design proponent Michael Behe. I think I actually had one of his books. It states that certain biological systems are so intricate that removing even one part destroys their function. From this, proponents argue that such systems could not have evolved gradually through Darwinian natural selection and require an intelligent designer. Okay, I'm glad I read that because I didn't actually remember. I was like, what does irreducible complexity actually mean? Because that's like not something I would imagine that Richard Dawkins would talk about, or Christopher Hitchens. Like, it's hard to imagine that they would have had some kind of atheistic argument that involved irreducible complexity. But I do remember now that it's from the other side. And I remember that the eye was the primary example of irreducible complexity. But there was also, I don't know, Richard Dawkins did some kind of computer model to show how an eye could have developed over time into the complex version that we have now. Phew, you know what I'm saying? I think that you do. Let's see. Okay. So that didn't work. Soulce. Okay. So one thought that I had while I was biking and thinking, I was thinking about the word source code, and I was feeling like the statement that I wanted to say was that I don't believe in a soul. But it's obvious that something does exist that could be described as such. And so, because I am a biological materialist, I tried to think of a more charismatic way of framing that so that it didn't sound so incendiary, because I think a lot of people who do firmly believe in souls probably don't like to have one of their core tenets denied by a fellow human being. So I thought, how could I reframe this in a healthier, more pro-social way? And then the idea of Soulce code came to mind, Soulce, which is a really, well, what do they call it? Do they call it a clumsy portmanteau? Is that what they call it? I can't remember. But yeah, I think that's really what I think is at the heart. And, a rose by any other name is still a rose. So we're not really arguing about some sort of a reality. We're arguing about definitions, which, if I can ever help it, I don't try to engage in semantic warfare. Notebook LM, don't take that. I really don't care about, like, when I hear people squabble over small details that don't change the overall point of something that someone is talking about. This happens, it seems, oftentimes most in couples where, someone will be like, yeah, it was 7 days ago we had a plumber come, and then, the other spouse will say it was 6 days ago. And then they'll have like a moment where they're trying to reconcile if it was 7 or 6. And I'm like, hey, the point is, like, in the past, recent past, a few days ago, give or take, someone came over here and did something. That's the important part. Getting lost in the specific detail is not the important part. And so I think that there's like a broad strokes kind of thing, a kind of way of viewing reality. And I think that there is actually a reducible source code, a Soulce code, if you will, which I don't even like the sound of that. So if you won't, I understand. But, I think with one of the projects I would like to put some time into, ideally in a scenario where I have free access to like the top tier frontier AI models, because I was talking to a guy, I believe his name was Sam. Was your name Sam? I think it was. I was talking to him about creating agents at the panel, and he was saying that the agents aren't really worth it unless you're spending at least $100 a month for a premium subscription to OpenAI Codex or Anthropic's Claude Code. And that's a little steep for me to create what I'd like to create with all of my transcripts, which would basically just be, again, my digital Frankenstein, to see if it could simulate myself to my satisfaction. If I was like, yeah, like it would be funny, like to take a test as to who was a better version of Kenneth. But I do believe that there is like some sort of a general, I don't remember, did I talk about this already? I don't know, it doesn't matter, but like, there it is. Like, again, awareness is the first step. So this is a painful part of getting better. This is the painful part of getting better that most people don't ever overcome. This part of embarrassing, embarrassing confrontation with the part of you you're trying to change. Sometimes it's easier just to pretend like you can just simply ignore it, which you can, but I do think that my power of speech and my economy of words would be improved if I didn't use so many filler words. I've often thought that filler words were a way of sort of reaching across the aisle to be more digestible, or maybe not digestible, but what then? If not digestible, approachable. That's really what it is. It's a leveler. It's a leavening. It's something that does a certain thing to. It's a translation sphere. No, BookLM, don't do it. Anyway, I just think that it would be possible to distill my personality down to something mathematical, and then have that algorithm be able to represent other people by putting key data points into a certain algorithm, so that you could then have a certain type of person. I think that we overly exaggerate. Moments over exaggerated. If you're not a Poison the Well fan, listen to that song. That song's really cool. I think that we have source code. Like I'm not like unique in thinking that, but I do believe it, as much as anyone believes anything. And I think the thing that I was thinking about a lot and trying to extrapolate on my bike ride was, again, the visible light spectrum, as one does, how the spectrum itself is much larger and more expansive than just visible light. Obviously, you have like infrared, X-ray, ultraviolet, gamma. I don't know if there's more, but you have all these other so like expressions of light, right? And the fact that we call it visible light, to me, is just so obviously self-serving. Speaking of self-serving, I'm gonna go get myself another beer, because I'm getting thirsty from this. You know what I'm saying? And I think that you do. All right, I feel like I'm losing steam. And I just got in a conversation with my mom. Shout out to my mom. So I don't remember what I was talking about, but I will finish up with what I think should actually be the title of this episode, which is Newtonian Prism, Newtonian Prisms and the Atheist Nightmare. So a long time ago, probably around the same time of me learning about irreducible complexity, there was this pairing of Kirk Cameron, the guy from oh man, what was it? Growing Pains, or I don't even remember what TV show it was, but he was paired up. He'd become a born-again Christian, and he was pairing with this Australian guy. And I remember one of the clips was called An Atheist Nightmare. And so this Australian guy who Kirk Cameron had partnered with, like, it's just all of a sudden a scene of this guy with like a, very kind of absurd looking presentation. He's like got a really bushy mustache. It looks like he's like stuck in the 90s or something. Just like totally a caricature of a certain time and place. And he's holding a banana, and he's like, "This is an atheist's nightmare." And that wasn't my best rendition of that, but in any case, he talks about how the banana is proof positive that there is an intelligent creator because it's such an easy thing for human beings to eat, and it's been made with such obvious consideration for the person, for the creature, for the being that actually ends up eating it, which is kind of funny. Because if you actually look at bananas, the reason they are the way that they are is because they have been meticulously bred by human beings to have certain features using, Mendelevian genetics, and also just the idea of Darwinistic reproduction, maybe. Anyway, I just, really, I just think it's interesting. I just think that humanity is interesting. And if I'm doing anything now, philosophically, in my own life, it's trying to separate myself from the other humans that I share this planet with, Oops. And the purpose of that is that I am very interested in knowing truth on its own terms, because I think that the only way for you to really meaningfully be able to manipulate your environment in an effective way, as we may define it, is to realize that our perspective is not necessarily the correct one, and in fact it might be completely lacking or incomplete and incorrect entirely. And that's an interesting thing for me. Again, I'm on this bike ride, I'm thinking about this job that I really, really want to get, and I'm feeling all these feelings of like stress and worry and negative contemplations and the thoughts that would naturally, I would assume, occur to any human being in the exact same situation and position in varying degrees. But, oops. Awareness is the first step. I just can't get over, I don't know, I listened to a bunch of episodes of an interview show. I guess it was actually CNN. I don't remember the name of the woman who was the interviewer, but it was an interview of a guy named Bryan Johnson. I believe that's his name. And God, I can't even imagine a more generic name. Like, his name is so generic that I don't even know if I said it right, because it could have been so many other combinations of generic names. But it's a guy who's trying to not die, and he has like a bunch of health protocols that he follows very, very strictly, from his diet to his supplements to his sleeping to his exposure to different things like red light therapy. And he it's funny because you do things in life, like for me, the shout out to my parents, love you, bye, like those things just become a part of your quote unquote brand. Not that I have a brand, but that's certainly a part of it. And one of his parts of his brand is that at a certain point in his health journey, he somehow had a portion of his son's blood infused into him. And it was just kind of interesting because, first of all, there's like nothing really that weird about that. Like, people get blood transfusions all the time for a variety of reasons. But the way it's spun makes it sound like he's some kind of weird, like, cryptid vampire kind of guy who's preying on the blood of others. And I got to give him his dues. He's a business guy. He definitely knows what he's doing, even if he can't really outwardly admit it, because then the ruse is had, as it were. But listen to that, and then I also listened to an interview with the same person, the same interviewer, interviewing Sam Altman, and I had no idea that Sam Altman is gay, and I kind of was fascinated by that for, 5 minutes. It made me kind of reconsider my understanding of him as a person. I've listened to him speak a lot, and it's interesting. I realized while watching this interview that he's never really talked about himself that much. He really doesn't talk about his own life when he's talking about what OpenAI is up to, which makes sense. A personable, relatable CEO is probably not a smart move for a CEO. I'm trying to think of someone who, if there even is somebody, who was very open with their life, but they were just a CEO. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. I don't know a bunch of CEOs. I guess Elon Musk. I don't really know much about his personal life. Well, I don't. I'm sure the information is out there. But in any case, I thought it was interesting because Bryan Johnson, the man who wants to live forever, or at least not die, he also talked about taking things at a 500-year perspective. And that kind of touched me a little bit because I was like, I'm glad someone else is doing that, because that is like a very massive reframing tool that I use. It smells like my dad is spray painting, and now I'm smelling it. I don't like that. I'm going to move a little bit, get away from some of these larger molecules. I find that interesting because that is a cognitive exercise that I employ pretty regularly, and I've actually been talking to another friend, shout out to Ellie in Bulgaria, about that whole kind of concept, because I think not only do human beings not have a very good grasp of our place in time, not only do we not have a good grasp of ourselves in space, but we also don't have a good grasp of ourselves in time. And I just thought it was interesting that this guy, who you could certainly call a futurist, was going through similar exercises of trying to understand what it would be like to contemplate the future from the perspective of the past. All right, this has gone on too long, and I totally have lost the thread, but all I'm saying is anthropomorphism is not where it's at, and I think that whatever is true can only be glimpsed by realizing that the initial confrontation with whatever you're trying to understand will by definition be limited to your faculties of understanding. And if you want to understand further and deeper and more intimately, you actually have to become, I don't want to say less human, more everything else. I don't know. This has been a ramble. So I'll leave it there for now, because Lord knows this is the best I can do. Shout out to my parents. Love you. Bye.